Must be a busy time for you, Paul.
No, I don't do tax work anymore. I've done that for 30, about 40 years, probably 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Just my own returns, but that's enough from family. I hate this time of
Okay.
year.
All right.
Except
So,
for the morning share.
of course. Okay. So what we were looking at yesterday is that we were looking at when is the earliest time to recite Kriya Shema in the morning. Unless, I mean, the other opportunity that we have before we delve back into the Gemara is if you want to see the Shulchan Aruch on when you have to eat the Afikomen by, because we talked about the Korban Pesach. Do you want to see the halacha, or do you want to just go back to the Gemara?
Well, it's always a discussion. It's always a discussion.
Yeah.
We look at one discussion.
And like, hey, just eat a bite of sauce and.
Just eat a baichatzos and get into bed, and then you're done. Well, Chad
I'm already
Gadya.
done by that. Over the toast.
Kadesh, Orchatz, Afikomen, Chad Gadya. We're done.
It's
Okay.
getting more and more like that, I have to admit.
Yeah. Okay. It does seem to get more like that as we get older. But all right, so I'll just show you really quickly if that's okay. Then we just got to turn on the projector. It's Pesach. Yeah, you just give it a sec.
That's a wait, patiently.
All right, so I think it's over here. Here, it's right here. It's Siman Tuf Ayin Zion in the Shulchan Aruch. And what I'll do is I'll just share my screen for those in TV land. Okay, so the Shulchan Aruch writes, this is Dinei Achilas Ha'afikomen, La'achar Gemar Kol HaSeuda, after the completion of the entire meal, Ochlem Mimatzah Hashmura Tachas Hamapa. You eat the matzah that has been, not the Shmura matzah, but the matzah Hashmura Tachas Hamapa, the matzah that has been protected or put aside underneath the cloth, which is, the afikomen bag that we have. Kazayas kol echad, and every person has to have a kazayas. Zecher lepesach hanechal al hasova. This is the surrogate and a remembrance for the korban pesach. V'yochlenu beheseba v'lo yivarech alav. You eat it while reclining. You don't make a bracha on it. V'yehi zahir la'ochlo kodem chatzos. And you should be careful to eat it before chatzos. And then the Rama adds, "V'yakdim atzmo shegam hahalel yikra kodem chatzos." And you should even recite Hallel before chatzos. That's really an early seder. Okay. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. And then with that, we'll explain. Now we saw that the reason for this is that the Korban Pesach was supposed to be eaten by chatzos as a siyag, as a fence, right? So if the afikomen is a surrogate for the Korban Pesach, we understand why that should be. So let's take a look. Mishnah Berurah Sifkat and Vav says, "V'yehi zahir v'chulei." What's the reason? He says, "Shekeven shehu zecher lePesach." Pesach. Since it's a remembrance of the Korban Pesach, you have to eat it when the Korban Pesach was eaten. And you can only eat it until chatzos. V'kol shekain kazayas harishon shemavarchal malav alachilas matzah shetzarach lizaher ma'oshelo la'achro ad chatzos. And certainly the first kazayas of matzah at Shulchan Aruch, there you for sure have to be careful to have it before chatzos. Uvidievet. Now, let's say you're in a bidievet situation. You got the yeshiva bachrim, or something happened, and you had to delay the seder. Im icher, if you delayed, mistapkim harishonim im yatsa yedei chovaso. The rishonim actually enter into a question: have you been even yotze the obligation to eat afikomen and to eat matzah? So let's say Shulchan Aruch, you are, for whatever reason, you didn't get to Shulchan Aruch until Chatzos, and you have to break the bracha of al achilas matzah. If it's already after Chatzos, you can't make that bracha. V'gam moror, afshehu midirabanan, yizar la'achla kodem Chatzos. And the moror too, you have to be careful to eat before Chatzos. V'im ichar yochlenu below bracha. And if you delayed, you have to eat it without a bracha. V'im hechshich lo kodem amiras hagada at samoch lachatzos. Now let's say it got dark and you weren't even able to recite the Haggadah until it's right before Chatzos. What should you do? In other words, what are you going to do in a situation?
Is that both biblical obligations?
Yeah, let's say you have an emergency. You had an emergency and you had to attend to something, a health crisis or whatever happens, and you're not able to start the Seder until mamish, it's 12:30 p.m. What am I going? Now I'm sitting down to the Seder. What am I going to do? So here's the prescription: Yikadesh, make Kiddush, v'yishte kos rishon, drink the first cup, v'yitol yadav, v'yavarech hamotze, ve'al achilas matzah, then wash. In other words, skip the whole Magid section, wash, make hamotzi, v'yochal, eat the matzah, v'gam yavarech al hamor, taketh kodem chatzos, and also eat the moror before chatzos. V'achar kach yomar Haggadah, then recite the Haggadah, v'achar kach yisod sudasa, and then have your meal. And in this way, at least you fulfilled the biblical commandment to eat matzah, which also has to be done before chatzos. And the Mishnah Berurah doesn't tell us.
When you eat the afikomen.
Yeah, you haven't mentioned it.
Well, he mentioned that the afikomen has to be before chatzos, but he's saying that there are times. Let me just see. The Zohir kodem chatzos.
The afikomen's part of the meal, I guess. Yeah.
Ve'im lo nizkar nachar shebech bar Pri Hagafen. Right. The second sif doesn't tell us what to do, but it seems like you have to be careful. But b'diavad, you can still eat it. Now, why the Hallel? So he says shagam Hallel etzlomer im birchaso shemevarech la'achareha yomer lechatchila kodem chatzos. You have to say that before chatzos, and this is only, however, lechatchila, according to the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Lechatchila, that's the preference.
So, but this is like I'm late for davening and you want to catch up quickly, say your Baruch Shem, or you say Ashrei, you skip.
Yeah.
Like, this is giving you a prescription. You said go.
Right. What should you do? Yeah. But bottom line is, Mishnah Berurah, by the way, doesn't give us the option to do what some other poskim suggest. I thought that he was going to prescribe that, which is that if you see you're getting close to chatzos and you haven't finished the Haggadah yet, or let's say you're in the middle of the meal and you're still saying Divrei Torah and you're not ready to get to the afikomen yet, eat the afikomen in a kazayas matzah, then finish your meal, and then and then right before benching, eat another kazayas of
I
afikomen.
thought afikomen can't be eaten fruit though.
Right. So, but this way, at least you fulfilled the obligation. You can say, I know these are all conflicting halachas. They're conflicting halachas. So Eat a kazayas matzah for afikomen, so that's before chatzos. You can continue eating and then eat another kazayas after chatzos. But the truth is, the Seder was designed that you should try to finish before chatzos. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to finish before chatzos. Because even during daylight savings, it's not that you have less time. You don't have less time just because of daylight savings, because by starting late, you get an extra hour. So chatzos is not 12, it's 1.
The second set is harder because you cannot prepare until a certain time. So
Correct.
maybe the meal is not warm, to start eating.
Yeah, well, you still have 3 hours. You still have a minimum of 3 hours. You can't get food warm in 3 hours. I mean, there may be something wrong with your oven if you
No,
can't warm the food.
it's tight. You feel it tight. The second set feels tighter than the first one. The first one,
Yeah.
you get in, and second,
Yeah.
well, in Israel you don't have that problem.
Correct. Yeah, so the answer is to make aliyah. Okay, so let us
It's still all done.
Yeah.
That's why I make sure these are based on.
So
Shit was around 12 o'clock, 12:30, you know what time was our time?
no, we always chatzos is much later. It's probably around 1:10, 1:15. Yeah. Yeah. But you have to balance the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim, of relating the Exodus in a meaningful way with fulfilling the mitzvahs of the Seder. And remember, when Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues were reclining in Bnei Brak, they had already eaten the afikomen, and they kept going. In other words, that's nirtza. Nirtza is the part that we're supposed to really embellish the story of the Exodus. And so Chad Gadya does not have to be the end of the Seder, but you should save all of that conversation until after the meal and after the Afikom. Okay.
What's the point of not eating after?
Because the Korban Pesach is supposed to linger, the taste of the Korban Pesach is supposed to linger in your mouth, because that's the lesson.
More matzah that's lingering in your mouth at this point. It's not
Right.
really.
Right. You can have water, you can have tea or coffee, but you can't have anything else just to wash it down. Yeah.
Not that you're hungry at that point.
Right,
It's
right.
more like you take a Tums and a pesticide,
Yeah. Okay, so let us go back to the Gemara. We can turn off the projector. Let's get back to our lights. What? Oh, that's right. Tonight is Pesach Sheni. There's a minhag to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni. That's just the minhag. There's no halachic obligations. There's some poskim who hold that you should even say tachanun. Our minhag is not to say tachanun. But it's really just a demarcation of what was done in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, when people were tamei and they couldn't bring the Korban Pesach.
Yeah, Rabbi,
Okay,
if you're gonna be at the bias tomorrow at 10 for Rabbi Yers's, Mendel's bringing some shmur matzah.
Oh, very nice. Okay. I'll see if I'm around. I probably won't be. But if I'm around, I'll pop my head in. Okay, so the Gemara had said that the earliest time to recite Kriya Shema is the source of a debate, but they both say that it has to be sufficient light to be able to distinguish between two colors. The first opinion that we saw was the Chachamim, Mishiyakir ben Tcheles lelavan. You have to be able to distinguish between the blue of the tzitzis and the white of the tzitzis. And Rabbi Eliezer says, ben tcheles lakarti, that you have to be able to distinguish between two shades of the blue family, between tcheles and karti. Karti is like an aqua, like a blue-green, and tcheles is more of a blue. Okay? Now, kini masnisa, so the Gemara starts off by saying that the way that you properly understand the Mishnah is ben tcheles shaba lelavan shaba. that you have to be able to distinguish between the blue strings of the tzitzis and the white strings of the tzitzis. So we're now just now on the very top of Yud Amud Aleph. We just turned the page. And because, as you can understand, the ability to discern different colors will also depend upon the sample size of what you're dealing with. If you have a larger sample of blue and white, it'll be easier to discern. If you have a smaller sample of blue and white, it'll be harder to discern and you'll need more light. So therefore, the Gemara wants to clarify it so that you can discern between, by looking at your own tzitzis, right? In the natural light, can I tell the difference between Tcheles and Karti? Then I know that I can start reciting Kriya Shema. Now remember, these demarcations, these criteria were quite relevant before the advent of clocks and watches, right? And just remember, in the times of the Gemara, they didn't have clocks and watches. There was no luach, that electronic board in the front of the shul that told you when is the first time to recite Kriya Shema. So people would walk outside, they'd look at their tzitzis and see if is it time to recite Kriya Shema yet. They look at their tzitzis and see, can I tell the difference between blue and white? Okay.
Rabbi, is there an assumption that everybody had the blue string on their tzitzis then? Because in history, that at some point they didn't, right? So,
That's correct. I'm not sure if we know the actual date when people stopped wearing techeles. It was probably later than the date when this is being written, because the archaeology suggests that it was going on during the Second Temple period and perhaps even later. So there were probably techeles samples that were still available while the Yerushalmi is being written, although I can't say with absolute certainty. Umay time in derabanan, or isem oso min hasamuchlo. He says, because when the Torah says you will look upon it, it means you'll look upon the thread of the tzitzis, meaning the word uri'item oto, look at it, which implies that you can distinguish between the thread that you're looking at from the other things that are adjacent to it. That's what uri'item oto, you'll be able to pick it out from among the others that are adjacent to it. Now, I also want to point out that how are we deriving from this that the mitzvah of Kriya Shema has to be recited in the morning? The Torah, when it says or isem oso, is talking about the tzitzis. So how does the mitzvah of wearing tzitzis connect to Kriya Shema? So I always thought that it had to do with the fact that one of the 3 paragraphs of the Shema was the parsha of tzitzis. And since that's one of the paragraphs of Shema, so when the Torah says, recite Kriya Shema, b'shoch b'cha, then you should, and you're saying it together with the parsha of tzitzis, that means that the mitzvah of tzitzis is somehow connected to the mitzvah of Shema. But I think I was mistaken all these years, because when you think about it, that may only be a rabbinic commandment to recite all 3 paragraphs of Shema. The biblical commandment of reciting Shema is to be makabel ol malchus shemaim, to accept the yoke of heaven upon yourself. And I think that either the biblical commandment is either saying only the first pasuk of Shema, or at the most, the first paragraph of Shema.
You're saying that if you only say the first paragraph, you're yokes to the mitzvah of Kriya Shema.
Midioraisa, you haven't fulfilled it midorabanan, right? So as becomes clear, so that only makes it difficult to understand. How then does, when the Torah says uri isem oso, look upon it, which means look upon the tzitzis, it's reflective of the mitzvah of Kriya Shema. So if you take a look at where are we? If you take a look at footnote number 1, If he says, Lefisha b'mitzvah zu nizkarim kol ha-mitzvos bichlalos. He says, this mitzvah, in footnote number 1, he says, because in the Art Scroll commentary on top, he says, Kaven shehem shechapasuk uzachartem es kol mitzvos Hashem. The Torah says, when you look upon the tzitzis, you will remember all the mitzvos of Hashem. Okay, va'asisemos, and you will do them. He says, Romes lemitzvos kriyashma. That idea of remembering all the mitzvahs Hashem is an allusion to kriyashma. Hapasuk malamed bazeh, shizman kriyashma shel shachar is maschil, kasher yesh maspik or yom lahabchin ben atchilet v'halavan shebetzitzit. And that's why, because of the words uzachartem et kol mitzvot Hashem, which is an allusion to kriyashma, that we know that when I recite kriyashma, it has to be at a time when I can look at my tzitzis. Now, how do the words uzachartem et kol mitzvot Hashem, how does that allude to kriyashma? So in footnote number 1, he says, Lefisha b'mitzvah zu nizkarim kol ha-mitzvot bichlalot. He says, because in the mitzvah of kriyashma, what you're doing is you're accepting upon yourself the yoke of heaven, which means I accept Hashem as my God. And that includes committing myself to do all his mitzvahs. Sheparshat Shema kolelet et yichud Hashem va'ahavato. Because when I say Shema, I'm unifying God. I'm declaring God to be one. I'm declaring my love for Hashem, ve'ahavta et Hashem elokecha, ve'tchiyuv mesirat gufa umamono al haTorah. And then I'm obligating myself to commit all my body and assets to the Torah, because it says, "V'chol levavecha, u'v'chol nafshecha, u'v'chol me'odecha," with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your being, with all your abilities. So that's what the commentaries say. All right, so I just want to clarify that that's the basis for knowing that there has to be a certain time when I can discern the tzitzis, because the tzitzis remind me of my obligations to do the mitzvahs, and that's really what Kriya Shema is all about. When I'm doing the mitzvah of Kriya Shema, I'm supposed to be thinking that I hereby am committing myself to a life of mitzvah.
So is that the talis or the baguette or both, or top of the tzitzis? Tzitzis on the,
It's the strings.
on your clothing or the top?
It's irrelevant. Why would it make a
So if
difference?
somebody doesn't have a 4-cornered garment, then, and they don't have a talis, then how do they know? How do they do the mitzvah at that point?
You mean, how will they know when it's light enough?
No, they won't have the mitzvah, because if someone doesn't have in those, you have the 4-cornered garment, you have to put sisters on. Whatever someone does not have in those days, 4-cornered garment, and they're so-called not married, so how would they, because those days they had to wear a 4-cornered garment. To do the mitzvah.
No. The Torah, you're right, Hal. The Torah only obligates you to have tzitzis if you have a 4-cornered garment. If you're wearing a bathing suit and you don't have a shirt, you're at a disadvantage. You have to maybe throw a blanket over yourself or something to cover any nakedness. We'll learn about that later in Maseches Berachos. But you're technically exempt from the mitzvah of tzitzis. I'm not sure I understand the question that you're asking.
Just to look at your tzitzis, but if so when you do the Shema and you don't have tzitzis,
You're certainly at a disadvantage, but you still have an obligation to recite the Shema, right? But yeah, I mean, that's why, it's not optimal to recite Kriya Shema before you daven, because you want to have talis and tefillin on yourself when you're reciting the Shema, because the Shema makes reference to both the talis and the tefillin, right? But you can still independently fulfill the mitzvah of Shema. Shema is accepting the yoke of heaven, which means I'm committing myself to a lifetime of mitzvot. And the tzitzis is a reminder of that lifelong commitment. And because it's a reminder of that lifelong commitment, I learned from the mitzvah of Uri'isem Oso that when I recite the Shema, it should be at a time when I can see my tzitzis. But it doesn't mean that I have to see my tzitzis in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Shema. Okay?
This is only for the morning time because at night you don't need the tzitzis.
Correct. Correct.
It's really-
Rabbi,
You say
you
without-
you'll say, Kabbalah Zon Chushamayim by simply saying Shema Yisrael Shema Elokeinu Shema Echad, or do you need to say V'ahavta?
So this is the machlokas, the poskim debate whether v'ahavta is a part of that mitzvah of Kabbalah Al Malchus Shamayim. It certainly seems that according to this commentary, it is part of the mitzvah of Kabbalah Al Malchus Shamayim. But we're going to leave that open-ended because I don't know that you can necessarily adduce from this Gemara that whole discussion.
You
Okay.
just took the reason of so and you just exploded it. You just took it to a whole new level of what tzitzis, what we think of tzitzis, or at least what I thought of what tzitzis are all about. Wow.
I heard a nice thing. People think that, oh, you're wearing a yoke, it's a burden, but Jews wear the yoke as
A badge of honor. Yeah.
like jewelry.
Yeah, we're proud. We're proud to do it. Okay, so that's the reason of the Chachamim, where Isam Oso distinguish between the blue string and the white string that's right next to it. Now, Umatame de Rabbi Eliezer. What's Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning? Who says you have to be able to distinguish between two shades of the blue family, because Uri'isem Oso, he uses the word Oso as in a different way, that you have to look at the color blue, Kedei sheyehei nikar bein hatzavuin, that it has to be a type of blue that is distinguishable from other types of blue. So they both look at the word oto, or item oto. You have to be able to look at it. It is distinguishing it from something else. The Chachamim say distinguish it from the other strings that are right next to it. Rabbi Eliezer says distinguish it from other shades that are similar to it. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. And of course, the ramification would be that, if you don't have a watch and you want to know is it time to recite Shema according to Rabbi Eliezer, you got to have a sample of something that's aqua color next to you, hold up your techelis to it and see, can I tell the difference? Is it light out enough yet? And then you'd be able to know if it's time to recite the Shema.
Robert.
Yeah.
From that idea about the shade of blue, why are we so caught up in the idea that the blue dye has to be from the one, is the name of the fish? But why don't we just focus on it's a blue shade and then we could follow this closely. So now people just have white, and if they're in this sort of situation, they can't distinguish anything. So why are we so caught up in that it has to come from that?
Why are we hung up on the source of the sourcing of it? Yeah, so this is a good question. It's a valid question. It's our tradition that the only way to get to that particular dye is through this particular sea creature, the chilazon, which is really more of a snail than it is a fish. But I think the next piece of Gemara might shed some light on that. Let's see. So Tani b'shem Rabbi Meir. We have a bryce in the name of Rabbi Meir. Uri'item ota ein ketiv kan elo urisem oso. It doesn't say you will see it in the feminine, because that's really tzitzis is a feminine word. So why do we masculinize it by saying Uri'isem oso? And we should have said Uri'isem osa. No, well, whenever we talk about inanimate objects, it's either male or female. Tzitzis is a feminine word. So why do we use the masculine word to describe it? So elo uri'isem oso magid shekol hamakayim mitzvahs tzitzis ki'ilu mekabel pnei shechina. Because really what we're referring to when we say oso, we're referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. By looking at the tzitzis, it's almost as if you're looking at God. Now, what do we mean by that? That you're receiving the divine presence by looking at your tzitzis. He said it's because shetzeva hatecheles domen layam, because the color of techeles resembles the color of the ocean. B'tzeva hayam dome la'asavim. The Vilna Gaon takes out that girsa because this girsa says that the ocean resembles vegetation. It does, but you're getting more in the green family instead of the blue family. So we're going to take out that word asavim, and we're going to go straight to V'tzeva hayam dome l'rakia. And the color of the ocean resembles the sky, the rakia. V'rakia dome l'kisei hakavod. And the rakia resembles the divine throne of God. V'hakisei dome le-sapir. And the divine throne represents or resembles the sapphire stone work that is described in Parshas Mishpatim and in Sefer Yecheskel that is beneath God's feet. And again, the annotators say that the girsa is just the opposite. The ultimate objective is to get to the color of the divine throne. That's the ultimate thing that looking at the tzitzis is supposed to remind you of the Kisei HaKavod, and that reminds you of Hashem. We'll continue this in Mirz Hashem tomorrow.
Robert, so the feels basically a name, but for